When you have a company like Disney, which for decades was dominating the entertainment industry, and it looked like it might never stop, and then all of a sudden, over the next few years, they start pushing identity politics. They start putting messaging out there that doesn't align with their family-friendly values or perceived values that so many people thought they had. They start to struggle in nearly every aspect of their company. All of a sudden, instead of people being really happy to be associated with Disney, you start to see people pointing the finger. You start to see these brands at these companies that had made so much money, were so successful, they start to fail. Things like Star Wars, things like Marvel. And we start to see people try to push all of the blame onto everybody else. We already know what Bob Iger's doing. Bob Iger, since he came back like it was always his plan to do to save the company, when he came back and took back over from Bob Chapek, since that point in time, we've seen article after article from the mainstream media talking about how Bob Iger, things are just so much worse than he thought. Bob Chapek is really the one to blame for everything, even though nearly all of the shit that happened during Bob Chapek's tenure happened because of things that Bob Iger set up or planned or agreements that he made while he was there. And he was still chairman of the board, by the way, for almost the entire time Bob Chapek was there. But now, in the aftermath of Bob Iger saying, we're really going to slow down on Star Wars and Marvel content, we're starting to see some of that blame game going around because let's just face it, despite the mainstream media and all these shills trying to convince everybody that everything's perfectly fine. There's no problems with Marvel. There's no problems with Star Wars. That's just toxic YouTubers that are saying that. These brands are so healthy. Well, now even they've been forced to come around to the reality that no, Star Wars is failing. Marvel is failing, and they desperately need to change. Well, now we're starting to see a different story come out. That just like we talked about when they announced so many of these projects that were upcoming that ended up getting canceled, we're starting to hear internally from people at Lucasfilm and people at Marvel. They're leaking things out to the press or in books that are published that, we were really pressured to do all these things by Disney. Disney are the ones that wanted us to announce all these things that we weren't ready for. You can't really blame us, can you? Lucasfilm and Marvel Studios were pressured by Disney to announce projects before they were ready. This is the kind of shit you see when a company starts to fall apart. You see this blame game. You start to see people that are pushing off their failures onto everybody else. And even if this might be some semblance of truth, that they wanted to push Disney Plus, they were desperate to have them come out and announce things, even if they thought there wasn't a chance that they get completed. They're trying to utilize this in a way to take pressure off of them for all of these said failures. When it comes to something like Marvel, you're having reports like this. Kevin Feige was forced to announce Fantastic Four and Armor Wars by Disney, even when nothing was in place for either of the two. That's a new thing coming out when it comes to that. When it comes to Star Wars, what they're saying was for Disney Plus Investor Day, we were forced to come up with all these projects like the Lando series, Rangers of the New Republic, all these things they fucking announced that like 10 Star Wars shows and movies that they wanted to have come to Disney Plus. They weren't ready for them. So now you're starting to see this happen. You're starting to see these people who have led Lucasfilm and Marvel Studios to disaster start to put little things out in the media to distance themselves from this, to distance themselves from that. The same way we're seeing these articles come out about how tired and exhausted Bob Iger is because things are just so much harder than he thought. When a company's failing the way Disney is, when they're losing money hand over fist, when all of these IPs and all these projects across all aspects of their entertainment, box office, streaming, theme parks, everywhere they're failing. You're starting to see people who are ready to distance themselves from what they view as the person that should be to blame for it. That is happening right now as we speak at Disney. The media wanted to pretend there was nothing wrong. They covered for Disney for years while we were out here speaking the truth. Well, now everybody is finally being forced to admit that Disney is a failing company. They decided to focus on identity politics and pushing an agenda ahead of entertaining people. And whenever you do that, eventually you will pay the price. That's what Disney's finding out the hard way.